Mark hated formal family get-togethers. He hated them. He hated dressing up. He hated going to them. So we were trying to make this more in keeping with what he wanted. And I think the root of it was his very unreligious parents, sent he and his brother to yeshiva for elementary school, which they were indignant about to both of their dying days. We were all together for Thanksgiving, and they were still complaining about how they got sent to yeshiva when they were kids. And my father used to sneak out and go play billiards at the billiard hall. Unfortunately,
We'll have to stop and then do it again because it only has to.
People would see him through the window in the billiard hall and tell the principal. So he got into a lot of trouble for that, which maybe explains why when my brother Steve used to sneak out of Hebrew school to go to Carvel, my father wasn't too upset about that. You're going to go, okay?
I have basically 2 lines. He lived a really good life on his own terms.
Yep.
There's not much more to say.
Really? You're going to make me speak again? Okay. I'll just stay here if they're going to be this quick. So my father went to Marietta College. I don't know if you know the story about how that happened, but he and his friend Herbie were thinking like, gee, maybe we better go to college. So they took the college book and they just let it open to whatever page, and they took their finger and they put it down and they picked Marietta. And they had my grandmother, his mother, call the school and say, they're really very nice boys and you should take them. And they did for some reason. And they had so many students that year because it was post-war that my father lived on a houseboat. So it just so happened, I don't think Eric's here yet, but a friend of his actually arranged for my father to have an art exhibit at Marietta this fall. And we sent a bunch of pieces down and had a great exhibit at Marietta. And I happened to mention the houseboat to the curator. And she's like, what houseboat? What are you talking about? So my father was in a nursing home, and I made some videos of him talking about his houseboat and the very famous Professor Whipple, and who used to time tests by dancing a jig. Like he would dance the jig. You have 5 minutes to answer this question, and he would dance a jig. And of course, by the end of the test, the jig was 30 seconds long. So he made those videos, which we sent to Marietta, and they're on YouTube. I can give you the links if you want.
Great.
And that was his college experience. Hey, who's speaking next? Isa? Okay. Talk longer than you.
So, I'm Isa. Mark was my uncle. Mark's little brother, my father, Luddy, died exactly 1 month before Mark did. And I like to think that the 2 old geezers are back together again. I think Mark and Luddy really grew close over the past 20 years. Once they both lost their wives, I think they realized that they had a lot of connection with one another. And my brother David, who is in Amsterdam, who can't be here today, and I have marveled over the years about the difference in personality between these 2 guys who were raised in the same family. And one of the things that all of us, including my dad, respected and appreciated so much about Mark was his boundless positivity. He was just always so positive. No matter what was going on with him, you'd ask him, how are you doing today, Mark? And he'd say, almost perfect. And, he would give the percentages of how well things were going, and they were usually over 80%, which was a great thing. And the fact that these 2 guys in their 70s and 80s and 90s grew so close together that Mark was really the only person that my dad really wanted to leave the house for. Like past 5 years he was living in Connecticut, and it's 2 hours to get here. My dad didn't really want to go out the door to the grocery store, but he would come visit his brother all the time. I'd bring him over, and they got to be together. And really towards the end of my dad's life, Mark was the only person he really wanted to talk to. He was, I didn't speak to my brother today. And he referred to Mark as my brother. And the connection that they had over the past decades meant so much to me and my brother just knowing that up to very close to the end, they had each other, and they had a trusted person and a person they felt comfortable with each other, and that meant the world to me. And Mark was not just an uncle to me, but also to my kids, who've been visiting him multiple times a year for their entire lives. And I'm just so grateful that we had this time with him on such a regular basis to hear his stories. Sometimes he and my dad would break out into songs, some song from, that they learned when they were 6 years old that they still remembered. And of course, Mark's art that decorates, our lives. And I'm gonna miss him greatly. So that's all I have.
We will.
Beautiful.
All right. Speaking of David, when Letty died about a month ago, David had talked about the soundtrack of his childhood, which was such a beautiful way to put it, because of course Letty was a pianist and he practiced 5 hours a day, a lot, and that was the soundtrack of David's childhood. And I started to think about, what was the soundtrack of my childhood? And of course it came to me, the Three-Penny Opera. When I was 2 and 3 years old, I think my father played it every day for 3 years straight. And it's the kind of thing where I could not sing a single song of it, but as soon as it comes on, I know every single note of it. And that was just one opera. I mean, he played opera all the time. And it was funny as we got older, he went really more into orchestral music, whereas I think everybody who came over at any time, he would have music on and he would be playing music. And for the last couple of months, all he's wanted to listen to was Bach. So we played Bach for him constantly. And that was just a great thing that David talked about. And of course, when Letty came up, all we did was talk about, music. And Jeff used to say that, Haydn was second rate, which would create a huge firestorm of argument. And it was great. And the other thing that you had to know about my father is that he loved to say words backwards all the time. I don't know if any of you knew this, but he would like to say every word backwards. And in fact, growing up, I knew somebody who was able to speak backwards fluently. And I'm sure that was my father's greatest wish. And in fact, for my childhood, my mother called my father Cram all the time. And I was a kid, I'm like, Cram? Why is she calling him, does she cram him in somewhere? But no, it was Mark backwards. And I didn't realize that until I was an adult, after hearing it for 30 years. So that's another tidbit about him. So he used to say ciao all the time. When he got off the phone with people. I don't know, is that, everybody here used to say ciao. But with me, we tried to figure out how to say it backwards, which is extremely difficult. So we came up with yakok, which Jeff will tell you, has nothing to do with ciao backwards, but somehow that became our greeting. So that's another tidbit about him. Would anybody else like to speak? Are you going to keep me up here all this time?
Is there a non-family person that?
Reed?
I'm just going to stay where I am. Reed Anderson. On the musical note and the optimism note, I remember visiting Mark on the occasion of one of his birthdays, and I think 94, and he said, yeah, I got a full box set of Mozart, and I said, wow. And I looked at the box of CDs, it's just complete. He said, I'm feeling optimistic. And I said, you certainly are. And he said, I got Bach too. So, and on a really serious note, for me personally, what it was like to be in the room with Mark, with somebody who very well could have been my own father, though far more fulfilled perhaps than mine was, and to be witnessed by them and to feel seen by them healed so much from me within myself that I've carried in my own personal history. And I will be forever grateful for that, and forever grateful for the hot dogs. Thank you, Mark.
Okay. So I don't know if many of you know, but Dad fought in the Korean War, that he was sent over there. He had gone to grad school and to be a social worker, I believe, and he hated it. So as soon as he left, they drafted him and sent him to Korea. He was supposed to go into the intelligence service, but he had had lung problems in his 20s, a lot of bronchiectasis. And so he couldn't go for a few months, and the Army was so mad that he had done that they sent him to the front lines. But as soon as he got there, the commanding officer, which he called the old man, realized that here was this college-educated guy. He's like, "You're going to be company clerk." So my father became radar. He was the company clerk. That didn't exempt him from going to the front lines, but it did give him some respite from that. And, my mom, who was one of the world's best knitters, she was a fantastic knitter. She used to knit him socks that were army drab on the top and then rainbow colored stripe underneath. So he had some color in his life. And I think it was his Uncle Davy, used to go to Katz's Deli, which is still there, and send him a salami. And his grandma, who, unlike her daughter, was a terrific cook, she used to make cookies and send them. And he was like, I was the most popular person in the entire barracks whenever Grandma would send me cookies. And we talked a lot about his war experiences because he really had never mentioned them. And what he used to talk about was his father, who never went to temple, ever, went to temple every week when he was in Korea. And that it was a really rich experience, and he said it wasn't an easy experience, but he was really glad he had done it, that he had met a lot of interesting people, and it was an experience that he was actually not sorry about at all. And then he always liked to talk about the leaning ship, that when they came home by ship. And of course, everybody wanted to get away from the prevailing wind, so the entire ship would be on one side of the ship, and the captain would get on through the bullhorn and go, "No, because the ship was tipping from all the weight on one side, and they all used to have to move over so the ship wouldn't tip over."
For those who don't know, he got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star while he was there.
Wow, he got a Purple Heart, did
Yeah,
he?
he did.
Okay.
They're both in his drawer or somewhere.
Okay, would anybody else like to speak? No, we're going to leave it to
I just
me.
want to talk about Mark's eyes
Okay.
because I'm tape.
You're taping yourself.
No, it doesn't matter. When we first met, probably about 15 years ago, I was so struck by the smile, not in his mouth, but in his eyes. He had this kind of glimpse, I guess is the word, I'm not sure, but it was always a life that, like, behind that window, there was something happening that was so alive and so joyful, despite all the losses and the heartbreaking parts of his life and the health issues. And he had that sparkle in his eyes that attracted me to him as a friend, and I just was I feel it's such a gift to have him in my life. He'll always be in my life.
Yep.
Thanks, Peggy. All right. I'm almost done here, actually. So, I don't know if you know about his cooking. So, Reed was just telling me about the Last Supper, which was hot dogs that they had together, and my father was the last time he entertained. But it really all started back when I was in high school. My father switched his office from downtown New Rochelle to over Gristides Supermarket in the local shopping center. Now, you have to understand that back in those days, men did not go into supermarkets. Like, that's how old I am. And But my mother, who was working, she's like, screw that, you're going shopping. And she would send him a list, and every time he would come home with grapefruits, chickpeas, and sardines and mustard sauce, and nothing that was on the list. And she'd say, well, what are you doing? He's like, I just love sardines and mustard sauce, and I'm going to buy them. So I think in response to her, maybe, he decided he better learn to do something with the chickpeas, because he wouldn't just buy 1 can of chickpeas. He would buy 11 cans of chickpeas. And so he made his famous chickpea salad, which I think all of us have had and have duplicated. And then I'm not sure how he got onto it, but he has a world famous recipe for coleslaw that all of us have enjoyed. And he did share with me the recipe, although he would not let me make it on my own. I had to be supervised. And so, but if anybody wants the recipe,
I want both.
Lemons.
it's always like a lot of lemons plus 1. That was always the recipe. A lot of lemons plus 1. So it depends on the size of the cabbage. It could be 6 plus 1 or 5 plus, but a lot plus, and then it would always be like, oh no, plus 1. And then you had to squeeze out the remnants of the juice. You couldn't leave the remnants of the juice in the lemon. So that was his cooking. So I have those recipes if you want them. Does anybody else want to say anything? Zoe, come on, Zoe.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I was Mark's neighbor. I just wanted to share a story from when I was younger. When I was maybe 7, my mom was in a work meeting, and I used to always go over to Mark's house, and I would sit with him, and I would steal all of his yarn. And I would go home, and I would knit with it, or braid with it, or whatever I did. And one day, I just left my house, and I went over to Mark's, and I sat there for 3 hours, and I talked to him, and I hung out with him, and I stole so much yarn. And I came home, and my mom was so worried that I don't know.
I called the police.
Yeah.
Her bike was gone. And we looked at every neighbor's but Mark's, because I didn't think you'd go over there during the day. And there she was. She came home and she had all the string and she was at Mark's, and they just hung out for the afternoon.
And the funny thing is, I never used any of the yarn, but I always went back to get more. And I still have a whole tub of yarn
That's great.
in my art closet that I never used. So I just thought that was a nice story. I will.
I want to say one thing. I have that same feeling. He was so positive. Didn't matter what kind of problem from my own sloppy story I ever mentioned to him. He made it kind of go away by just reframing it. You don't have to worry about that. He gave you permission not to suffer. And I thought, God, it was like innate for him. He never ever complained. Every time I'd go over there, if there wasn't music on, I'd say, let's put some music on. He goes, okay, Schubert. And then crank it up. So it was always a pleasure for me to visit Mark and meet all you. So, hi.
I can say something. I'm Amy. Also, we live across the street. So we've been across the street from Mark for over 20 years. I mean, we had great dinners with him. He cooked corned beef and cabbage for the first time. Kids never had corned beef and cabbage before.
It was really good.
We loved our time with Mark. He was, Wade, my husband's not here. Our son's taking his road test now. But, you know, when we think about Mark all over the years, Wade and I would say he's an example of how we want to be as we get older.
Yep.
Nice.
Here.
So, well, you know, I was talking to him one day and a few years ago, and I said, you know, it seems like you're having a pretty good time. And, you know, he had all his friends and he had a really active life, which was kind of funny because my mother told me before she died, she said, you have to take care of him. He's going to be a hermit. You have to take care of him. How you can live with somebody for 53 years and not know them, you know, that's a perfect example of that. But he really had a wonderful life. And I said to him, it's like, oh, it seems like you're having a pretty good time. He goes, my 80s were maybe my best decade ever. And isn't that something that everybody should strive for? Yeah. I was so impressed by that. So anybody else? Because I only have a couple. Oh, good.
Pursuant to what Reed and Peggy said, I always saw the gleam in his eye. But the last time I was at a scene like this, it was my old man in '99, and I almost fell on his grave. Miranda probably prevented me from falling in because my father was she might have pushed me. But, my father struggled with booze, and he didn't know how to really join the world. And Mark did. I have a lot of clever things to say, but I don't need to say 'em. But I really miss him. That's it.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yes, please. Hi, my name is Terry, and I met Mark, I don't know how many years ago, but through Sue and Phil Knoll. And then I would be invited to dinner sometimes. And knowing Mark was having a new friend at my age, Mark at his age, was like we were in junior high school or because it was so much fun. And being in his home with piles of yarn and the kitchen counter with piles of yarn and stacks of wine bottles over and over. Very, very entertaining.
We haven't changed. It's still there.
And yesterday I was with my daughter Heather, and I was talking about Mark, and she knows from me about Mark and his artwork. And she said, "What will you do tomorrow? Will you all stitch him into the ground?" And I thought, that's sweet.
Peculiar.
So here we are to stitch Mark into the ground.
Which is the perfect segue into my final tidbits here. So people are always fascinated by how my father actually did his art. And people, obviously not this group, but people who didn't know it, thought he painted everything on the canvas and then, just stitched it like paint by numbers. So when I told them, I said, no, there's nothing on the canvas. He just does it as he goes along. Like that was always so amazing to them. But what I found funny and what we talked about a lot is that he would take the canvas and he would tape it to the wall and he would stare at it for days. And I said, so how often do you come up with a plan after staring at it for days and then stitch it? He goes, never. He said, I'll stare at it for days, I'll come up with 100 different plans, and then I start stitching and I don't think about it and I always do something completely different. So I thought, okay, so, I guess you had to stare at it so you're unconscious, like, okay, whatever. And the other thing that people always ask me about is how, what is the significance of the names? Like the names of the pieces. How did you come up with those? Like, is there some symbolism in there, or is it metaphor, or is it whatever? Well, I'm here to tell you, the names mean absolutely nothing. That we just made them up. Peggy made up a lot of them. I made up a lot of them. He made up a lot of them. That often had absolutely nothing to do with the piece whatsoever. We just thought they sounded funny, and that's how the names were created. So now you all know the big secret of Mark's artwork. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to say? Okay, so because he was a veteran and they just happened to be here, we're going to put a flag on his casket.
Accept this flag. Appreciation for Mark's faithful service to his country.
What do I do with it?
Take it home.
Take it home. Well, I hope this doesn't offend you, but now I have to make one little final comment here. So he said on behalf of the president, and I think all of you people know that he knew Donald Trump from the time Donald Trump was a kid. Did you know that? Yeah, he worked for Fred Trump for many decades. And when Donald was a teenager, he used to follow him around.
And of course, his last comment to me was, "Just my luck, I know a president and he's a total schmuck."
You'll still keep the flag?
Of course.
Eisenhower something.
Okay, that's it.
Back at the house, there will be